Alright, in this video today we are going to spend some time going over MLA citations, which you will need in order to write a successful stakeholder proposal. Now, oftentimes students come into CO 150 with a variety of experiences with citations. Some of you might have been practicing them for years. For some of you, these conventions are completely new. There are quite a few important rules involved, so in order to avoid issues of plagiarism, you want to make sure that you take notes, double check your work, and bring any questions or points of confusion to your instructor. During this video, make sure that you're taking the time to jot down some of the most important ideas so that you can reference them in class and when you are writing your proposal. Feel free to stop and review it at any time if you need to. Now, for those new to citations, you might have questions as to why citing this way is so important in academic and rhetorical writing. It shouldn't be surprising that this ultimately connects to audience. One of the appeals that we talked about in this class is ethos, which is the appeal that supports our credibility. Citations in academic writing are used as a way to further develop our ethos. So developing ethos in a paper is about demonstrating that you're a credible writer, and you do this in a lot of different ways. So we've talked about synthesizing evidence from multiple sources to demonstrate you read widely. So you aren't trying to support your ideas just with one source, but you're pulling from multiple sources. You also do this by using a fair tone and language so that your writing doesn't come across as accusatory or condescending. Also, you do this by writing in a way that's appropriate for your intended audience, which is something that we've talked quite a bit about. And you do this by using appropriate and accurate paraphrases, quotations, and attribution, which is what we are going to focus on today. So let's take a minute to quickly review what we have already learned about citations. Now, we are going to run through these notes rather quickly since we have already introduced these concepts, but feel free to pause the video at any time if you need to. So we'll start with paraphrasing. In A1, we focused on how to paraphrase to demonstrate close reading. You always want to remember these important points about paraphrasing. It's important to use synonyms and change the sentence structure so that you are writing the ideas in your own words, but it's also important that you check that the meaning hasn't changed, as well as the tone, so that you're accurately representing the author's idea. Now, we also talked about quoting correctly. You want to remember that you should generally quote when either the original is so clever that a paraphrase would lessen the impact, or the original is so precise that to change it would alter the meaning, or the original is concise and a paraphrase would double the original. So those are some things to keep in mind when deciding on whether or not to quote or paraphrase. When you quote, remember that you must insert the writer's exact words into your own writing surrounded by quotation marks, as shown in the example below. Another thing that we talked about in A1 is attribution. Whenever you use ideas from someone else, whether as a quote or a paraphrase, we always need to remember that we must attribute it to the author. Citation is a type of attribution that we're going to learn about today, along with author tags, which we covered during A1. Citation generally has two parts: in-text citations and a works cited page with full citations for each source. So I have here a flow chart of sorts that kind of helps us to break some of these ideas down. So we see that we develop ethos in a number of ways, which we just talked about, one of which is attribution. In A1, we used a specific kind of attribution known as author tags. For this assignment, we will use a different kind of attribution, citation. This citation requires two important components: the works cited page, which has full citations for each source, and in-text citations. So we're going to focus on these two components for the remainder of this. So we'll start with a full citation for a source. You have to give full citation information for every source you use in a paper. These full citations are collected on a works cited page at the end of your paper. Now, I'm sure many of you have some experience compiling a works cited page or a bibliography, but it's also important to be aware that the citation has to follow a very specific model and details are important. All of these things matter in a full citation. capitalization, punctuation, spelling, and whether something is italicized or not. So when you are copying down a citation, you want to make sure you're paying attention to all of these things. Now, in addition to making sure that you have the correct format for all of your citations, you also want to make sure that your works cited page is formatted correctly. Here are a few things to keep in mind. The works cited page always comes at the end of your paper. It is where all the full citations of your sources are listed. It has all sources you used in your paper following guidelines discussed previously. Everything is listed alphabetically by first word in the citation. This is usually the author's last name. Sometimes it's the title, but it's by whatever that first word is in the citation. Hanging indents are included for each citation. The works cited page should be formatted with 1-inch margins. Your last name and page number in the upper right-hand corner. Page numbers that continue from the body of your paper. That is, if the body of your paper is 7 pages long, the works cited starts on the next page, page 8. So here we have an example of a correctly formatted works cited page based on MLA. A couple of things to pay attention to. The title is centered. The title is always works cited. Each source has a hanging indent so that that first word sticks out, whether it's the organization, the title, or the last name. Everything is alphabetized and double-spaced, and notice that the sources are not bulleted or numbered. They're simply listed in alphabetical order. So this concludes our notes on the works cited page component of citations. We're now going to move to that second component, which is in-text citations that we talked about earlier on in the video. Now, in-text citations are equally as important to the citation process as the works cited page. This is the part of the citation that is in the body of your paper. One of the questions that often comes up in CO 150 is, when do I need to cite? How often do I need to cite? And it's actually more often than you might think. You want to definitely make sure you're citing when you quote from a source, when you're paraphrasing an author's ideas, but also when you're using factual information from a source that is not common knowledge. So let's just take a minute to think about that. What do we mean when we talk about common knowledge? And really the definition for that is any information you can expect a reasonable, well-educated person to know. So for instance, it's generally considered common knowledge that Facebook is a popular social media website created by Mark Zuckerberg. So no citation would be needed for that. Not common knowledge, in December of 2012, Facebook had approximately 618 million active daily users. You obviously want to cite that because that is much more specific. So obviously there's a little bit of a gray area here, so you will have to use your best judgment, but when in doubt, it's always a good idea to cite it. Once you have figured out where you need to cite, it's important that you're including in-text citations correctly. You need to have done the full citation of the source before you can do a correct in-text citation. This is because you will need the first word of the full citation in your works cited page in the in-text citation. So generally that first word is the author's last name, but at other times it can sometimes be the title, the publisher information, an organization's name. Oftentimes though it is the author's last name. Either way, it's always that first word in the works cited citation. When using non-web sources, you also need to make sure you have the page number where you found that information or quote from. Once you have this information, you can cite one of two ways. You can cite parenthetically or you can cite narratively. When you cite parenthetically, you include the citation information, which is usually the author's last name, but always the first word in the works cited page entry in the parenthetical along with the page number. Both of these indicate to the reader that the quote came from the source by Reitman. I can go to the works cited page at the end, find the full citation for Reitman, and access the source. Also note the punctuation. You want to close the quote, then do the parentheses, with the author and page number, then put the period after the parentheses. These details might seem small, but they do matter. The other way that you can cite intextually is narratively. So in this case, you would use an author tag and then a parenthetical at the end with the page number. If you use an author tag in the sentence, only the page number is in the parentheses because you've already used that last name, that piece of information. So that concludes our notes on citations. We're going to spend some time practicing these skills in class. As you continue to work on your A2, make sure that you're taking the time to use the resources available to you, practice these skills, and address any questions with your instructor.